Well, it says that I can broadcast my Hangout up to 8 hours. I highly doubt I'll actually need that much time to do this. But anyway, greetings, happy Mother's Day to any and or all mothers or mothers to be. Um, this is kind of an update sort of hangout, a bit extemporaneous. I wanted to touch on a few different subjects, some relative to motorbikes and some may not be so relative. I'll sort of make that determination as I go along here. All right, so as you know, the Kawasaki H2 and H2R came out last fall, and now that a lot of owners have begun to take possession of those bikes, we're seeing a lot of good stuff, exciting stuff going on. I believe Jason Britton, well-known stunt biker who rides Kawasaki's exclusively, if I'm not mistaken, does a great is the proud owner of an H2, and then there's a variety of others, I guess, throughout the globe that have acquired the new bike. And I'm just gonna maybe touch on a few reasons why I really like this bike. Now, those of you who know me, at least some of you who are relatively close acquaintances of mine, know that I don't particularly like inline four bikes. It's just a personal preference, and probably one of the reasons why is because a lot of the inline four bikes are kind of as common as dirt. It seems like everybody has an inline four bike. They all make the same racket, which is not entirely unappealing to me. It's just a very common sound. And so I also don't particularly care for the characteristics of the inline four motor, although I guess all things being equal, they in some senses act like some of the older two-strokes where you had to really keep the motor spooled up in the high RPMs to really get it going. But once it's up there, once that motor is in that sweet spot, or in those sweet spots, they do very well, particularly in top speed runs and so forth. I'm more impressed with motors that have, let's say, fewer displacements or smaller displacement motors, or larger displacement motors with fewer cylinders that are able to achieve or accomplish a lot of the same things, but in a different way. I'm big. I love V twins. I obviously I'm a huge triple fan. I love the 3-cylinder motor. I've talked at length about that motor and bike in some of my other hangouts with guests and so forth. But back to the H2. First of all, and I've said this a number of different times in threads, and maybe I even said it in a hangout where my first bike I ever owned or bought for myself was a Kawasaki, 1981 Kawasaki GPZ 550 air-cooled inline four. Loved that bike. It was a great bike. I absolutely loved that bike. I guess you could say it was a naked sport bike. It was the precursor to what later became the Ninjas and so on. But I've always liked the naked bike look, and I guess that's why I gravitate more towards naked bikes than I do fully faired bikes, which is an interesting thing about the H2. The H2 is not a fully faired bike. It actually has a portion of the underbelly all the way up to probably the midsection where the radiator is exposed. And I found that I'm not exactly sure why they did that. Perhaps they felt having too much fairing would make the bike look too massive, or perhaps it was to allow more air to get at the motor and engine to keep things cool, because I understand that bike generates a lot of heat. I would think that any bike with forced induction that's constantly turning high RPMs is going to be generating a great deal, a massive amount of heat. So I'm tending to, you know, uh, gravitate towards the answer that it was an engineering decision as opposed to an aesthetic one. Although they obviously, in so doing, they've made the bike, in my opinion, look brilliant. I think it looks great. Um, I love. I'm a huge fan of tubular trellis frames. I mean, I like the twin spar aluminum frames. They look good on. They look great too. But I'm just really a big fan of tubular trellis frames, particularly on some of the older Ducati models like the SR2 and 4, and um, the Monster is probably not so much, but the MV Agusta F3 and a whole host of other bikes, and now the H2. I just think they've done a brilliant job of incorporating a tubular trellis design, which is quite an old engineering concept as far as building motorcycles is concerned, and dovetailing it with all of the other components of the bike. The paint on the bike to me is just it's second to none. It's just a brilliant paint finish, and the way they accented or complemented the colors with painting the frame it looks like it's like a metallic flake, kind of their candy lime green metallic flake. I'm not sure what color they're calling it, but it has that sort of iridescent hue to it, but it's a kind of a very rich looking color. Um, on there, and I just and of course the single-sided swing arm, which I believe is a first for Kawasaki, and I just think it's a really good-looking bike. The reason why I like the looks of the bike is because it does not look like anything else out there. It doesn't obviously it doesn't have the smooth, curvy, I guess what some would call sexy lines of some of the other super sports, but I don't think that's the point. I mean, this bike this bike has a look like it's in your face, and it looks like a pit bull, for gosh sakes. I mean, it looks very menacing. It doesn't very aggressive, very testosterone packed package looking bike, very visceral looking, and I think that that's one of the things. Although, you know, if you look at the frame, here's me geeking out on this sort of thing and getting kind of weird about it. But if you do look at the frame, I mean, it does. There are some actually very nice lines on the trellis frame in there that offset a little bit of the angular um, lines of the bike, like on the tank and the fairings and so forth. But anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse with that. And obviously, there's a huge rivalry now that owners, as I started to say, owners have been now acquiring their bikes, and then there's been a lot of to do with, you know, who's king of the hill now, sort of thing. And as I said in one of my other videos, I mean, all things being equal, and the problem is now, even though I believe the H2 and the new BMW, the 2015 S1 KRR, are both 200-ish horsepower. They're approximately the same. At least that's my understanding of it. And if somebody happens to, you know, get some different numbers up on the board or whatever, certainly they can correct me if I'm wrong and just post them in the thread, and then we can go forward with that and have a discussion about that. But so around the same amount of horsepower, I guess, you know, out of the box. And you have, although the H2 is what, a good 50, 60 pounds more than the BMW. Now, it probably goes without saying that the H2 was not really intended to be used as a track bike, although that's probably where you'll best be able to exploit that bike's all of that bike's potential. Both the H2 and the the H2R. Certainly the H2R, because it's like a whole 125 more horsepower than its sibling minus the R. So that is just, to me, mind-boggling. Now, there's been a bunch of conversations and threads and questions about whether or not you can take a $25,000 H2 and then turn it into a what is it, a 50 or a $70,000 H2R. And my knee-jerk reaction to that answer is not just no, but like hell no. I don't understand why Kawasaki would give you, make a $25,000 bike available to you, and with a few turns of a screwdriver and maybe a few computer hacks, you turn it into, you give it another 125 horsepower. I'm not convinced that it is as simple as that. And this is pure speculation, but I'm going to speculate that the R obviously has a different exhaust system on it just by looking at it. The other thing that I'm tempted to think that, like, how are they able to squeeze with the same displacement, mind you, how are they able to squeeze an additional $125 horsepower out of the R model? And so I'm going to say there are probably several things that work there. There's probably different components. It's probably a different head setup on the R model. This is totally speculating. Now, that's a guess. I'm going to guess that there are bigger injectors on the R model. I'm going to guess that it is a different throttling system setup on the R. I'm sure maybe the mechanisms are similar. Perhaps there is a bigger injectors and bigger throttle bodies on the H2R. The planetary gear supercharger, I want to say that it is probably engineered slightly differently, with maybe a bigger impeller to create more boost. But that's just a guess. I'm also going to guess that the tolerances for the R and the metallurgy are probably slightly different. Better internal components. If you're going to be turning a good 125 more horsepower, which is like basically slapping on another motor from like a Yamaha R6 or something like that. So it's basically taking the H2 and putting another R6's worth of horsepower into the motor in addition to that. So I'm going to say that maybe the compression ratio is slightly different. I don't know. The problem with that would be whenever you force induction a motor, you can't really make the compression so high, because you're getting additional compression from just by virtue of forcing air into the motor is creating a lot of stress on the motor to begin with. So generally speaking, they adjust the compression ratios on the pistons to complement the amount of induction or forced air that's going into the motor vis-a-vis the supercharger. So that's another contention there. So there's a whole, and then of course the electronics package, I'm certain is probably very different, the fuel mapping and et cetera and so forth. So I would say, that is what separates a $25,000 bike from, I believe, is the R a $50,000 or is it a $75,000 bike? I can't remember. Well, that's what separates the $25,000 bike from the either $50,000 or the $75,000 bike, whichever two figures those are, or thereabouts, somewhere around there, I know. But yeah, I mean, you'd have to spend that much money anyway to build up your bike and so forth. So The other thing, there was like a couple of videos, or there's one other video where there's a stock OEM H2 that goes up against a really worked ZX10, and I was actually impressed. I mean, the ZX10 really impressed me. The ZX10 impresses me anyway, but as an overall bike, not actually gotten to ridden one yet, but I've taken some very close looks at those bikes, and I like what I see. But anyway, so that's sort of my H2 Kawasaki rant for this portion of the hangout. The other thing, I guess, is rumors. There are apparently, and these are just rumors. I don't know how much or how little truth there are to them, and that's more or less why they call them rumors. But there is a rumor that the ZX10 may be or evolve into, or be, I don't want to say replaced, but you can't, because you can't replace something as wonderful a bike as that's been. But you know, and I had this conversation months and months ago. You know, I believe there was a little bit of a speculation. Like I said to my friend, my guest that was in the hangout, I said, you know, wouldn't it be really cool if Kawasaki kind of followed suit like they did back in the late 60s, early 70s with the H2, and then they came out with the H1. You know, the original H2 was a 750cc air-cooled two-stroke inline triple motor, and then they complemented that bike because it did very well with a 500cc inline triple two-stroke, and on down the line. So, you know, I was saying to him, it seems to me that the next logical step, well, two things before I go into that. One of the things that I think that people need to understand is the H2 is, because it was really never intended, it doesn't appear to be ever intended for the track just by virtue of its weight. Many of the reviewers are saying a lot of the same things. You really have to muscle that bike around in the turns and stuff, so that, because that additional weight does make a lot of difference when you're flogging a bike around on a track. So so I don't think we'll ever see that bike, and of course it being forced induction and that sort of thing, which would preclude it from actually being able to, well, one, its weight, and two, the fact that it's forced induction or supercharged would preclude it from being able to participate in any races. Now, whether or not that actually changes, the rules change later on down the road, where you have smaller displacement bikes that are forced induction, and then you know, that would compete and in circuit racing like World Superbike, Super Sport, MotoGP, and so forth, Moto America, and so on. So I don't know whether that would actually materialize or not, but anyway, it's kind of fun to think about. What was I starting to say? But would it be fun if Kawasaki followed up with an H1 bike that would actually compete or be like on like a 7? I said not only just an H1, but let's say the H1 total speculation. Wouldn't it be cool if the H1 was actually a 750cc bike that was as fast as a 1000cc super bike or sport bike or whatever? I said that would be totally cool. That would totally impress me, you know. And this kind of brings me back to the makes me think of the Aprilia back in the, what is it, 03 or 04, I think it was. They had a 3-cylinder 998cc inline 3-cylinder bike that was competing in MotoGP. It was kind of a disaster. for them. It crashed a lot, and it was almost impossible to control because the doggone thing was just too powerful. They couldn't sort the electronics out of the bike, and they just had a lot of problems. But having said that, that Aprilia RS3, or it's really the RS Cube, but a lot of people will call it the RS3. That bike was the first bike to exceed the 200-mile-per-hour barrier on the MotoGP circuit. You can look it up. I believe that is a fact that you can look up. What else? So I said, I was saying that, it would really be cool if they came out with this, H1 to complement the H2. Maybe it could be, the weight disparity. They could do something about the weight disparity, but there are a lot of things at play there. The reason why the H2 is a much heavier bike. They have to reinforce that. I think that's a chrome moly tubular steel frame, or I think it's chrome moly steel, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, the added weight of the supercharger and so forth. So all of those components add weight to the bike, in addition to the fluids to have to keep things cool. So you have more fluid in the bike, as well as more components on the bike, adding weight to it. So anyway, that's my pipe dream. And so there was a rumor I had heard that Kawasaki may have something in the works of something like an H1 to either replace the ZX10 or that the ZX10 would evolve into this new iteration. I think many people are hoping that they keep the twin spar aluminum frame super sport or super bike. I think it would disappoint a lot of people if they did that, but Kawasaki, being some of the engineering geniuses that they are, I think it would be a question of maybe risking losing a few customers and gaining some new ones if they decided to go again with another tubular steel frame design bike to complement the H1. Anyway, again, pure speculation, but and rumor, but it's kind of fun to conjecture things like this. At least it is for me, anyway. So yeah, that's really what I had to say about that. And as far as Zone Television and the channel, I've just got so many other things going on right now that are precluding me from really immersing myself into. I have several other projects going, and trying to keep this channel going has been a real challenge for me. Not just because I have other projects going, but things in my personal life also that are taking a great deal of precedence and a great deal of my time, require a great deal of my time for that. But in any or either case, I mean, it's, life has a funny way of getting your attention and then bringing or taking you away from the things that you think you want to do or should be doing, and then moves you into another direction and so forth. So this year is going to prove to be extraordinarily challenging, and time, so many things that are going to require a lot of time. I've been trying to, some people have asked me, for meetups and all that sort of thing. I got several feelings about this because, number one, there aren't a whole lot of motovloggers that watch my channel, and consequently, I don't really watch a whole lot of other motovloggers' channels. There's only maybe a handful of people that I kind of touch base with intermittently, or channels that I view intermittently, few and far between. Even though I enjoy the medium and I've enjoyed the format, I'm not one that can, I've just never really been one that can stay, like in a single format. And those of you who look at my channel, there I do a variety of different things. You know, maybe I'm not the most exciting channel, moto vlogging channel, and I really don't care. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't know that I've really aspired to be the greatest moto vlogging channel, but you know, as a consequence of my experimenting with different formats and so forth, has probably caused a few people to scratch their head and say, well, you know, what what is the channel? It's like he does some bike reviews and sometimes you know, other things or whatever. Well, it's true. Sometimes I've done a lot of bike. That's kind of what sort of got me some traction, because it was something I really enjoyed doing. And one of the reasons I got into this in the beginning was because I was actually looking for transportation in the beginning, or even before I started this channel. And I'd gotten a hand-me-down car from a family member, and it was just going to cost more money than the car was worth to fix. And I really didn't, you know, I didn't really need to do any distance kind of driving. And I figured if I did, I would just rent a car. So I didn't want to take the bus everywhere, because you're at the mercy of the bus schedule and also at the mercy of public transportation. And sometimes the people that travel in public transportation are not always, and having used public transportation quite a bit myself, it's just, I don't like being around a lot of people. I do get claustrophobic, or sometimes even, I guess you could say, I just never really been somebody who's been good about being around big crowds of people and stuff like that. And it's not that I wouldn't take public transportation if I needed to. I certainly would. But anyway, that was a huge digression. But my point is that I needed transportation, and so a light bulb went off in my head, and you know, scooter. And so I'm like, yeah, you know, what the hell? Why not? So I did. I went out and I bought myself a scooter, and it was great. I didn't need to register it. I didn't need to insure it. $5 of gas every 2 weeks. I could park it pretty much anywhere, and it was more than ample for what my needs were. So I started doing all this research on YouTube, and I was like, oh, cool, man, there's like a lot of people that ride scooters and stuff. And so I was trying to figure out what the best one was. And of course, I went with a Honda. That's pretty much how the company got its got its start. They started, I guess, building maybe lawn equipment or whatever. But then they started building mopeds and scooters and stuff like that, and they just grew from there. And so I've always heard good things about them, and that's what I did. I just bought a little Honda scooter, and it kind of rekindled my whole interest in motorcycles, because I'd been sort of out of the whole motorcycle thing for quite some time. And that's what I did, and I really enjoyed it. So the reason why I gave the channel the name that I did was I just happened to be a huge Twilight Zone fan, huge fan of Rod Serling. I believe he was probably one of the most brilliant short play writers of the 20th century, aside from a handful of others. But he was probably arguably one of my favorites. And so the channel was sort of an homage to that, in some way, shape, or form. And I felt that if I gave it kind of an innocuous name, if that's even a term that's contextually attributable to this point that I'm trying to make, I would say that it left the door open for me to do a variety of different things, or go in pretty much any direction that I wanted to go. But yeah. And I guess probably one of the last points I'd make about this in this hangout that has I've attempted to actually vlog about this, and I always find myself not really liking what I have to say, but I always find myself coming back to sort of the same thing. And this was with respect to the whole this handful of motovloggers holding their hat out and asking for money so that they can get another bike or an additional bike or whatever, which didn't sit well with a lot of us. And so earlier today, I mean, or the last couple of days, I was actually looking through some stuff, and I don't think he was a motovlogger, but there's this other dude who's in my circles, and he had posted a few things about these prosperity preachers. In other words, is these Christian preachers that go out there and they basically tell people to give them money so that they can get a blessing. So I'm like, well, gosh, I was scratching my head and I'm like, that sounds eerily familiar. I just couldn't help but laugh. And I'm like, that's just the same doggone thing. It's like, well, I really need a bike. I liken that whole thing to, and it's not that asking for money, on YouTube for whatever it is you're going to use the money for. Obviously, these guys had stated what it was they were using the money to get, but the unintended consequences of actually doing stuff like that, particularly with just material consumption as opposed to a need, that's the big problem. That's like the line of demarcation for me. And it's not that I've, not done some shady things in the past that I regret, and I certainly do. But I think to the point, people on YouTube, all of us on YouTube that are creating content for consumption, either for entertainment or informative purposes, in my opinion, have a fiduciary responsibility to the viewing audience, which is to say, everything you do on here is you're leaving a legacy of yourself. I mean, this is, if you're not here if you're, gone tomorrow, everything that is on YouTube is an echo of who you are or what you stood for or what you did. Now, to the point of these guys asking for money so that they can get something for themselves, as opposed to really needing it, like, like a family member has a need and they're trying to help them out, or that their business model is such that requires them that they need money, but like just going out and asking for it, to me, is just in really bad taste. And I'm sure that I understand that the demographics of a lot of the moto vloggers are like a lot of young kids watch these guys. They're impressionable. They probably look up to them. They're cool because they do wheelies and they use a lot of expletives, and they're rebellious and so on and so forth, or whatever. So obviously, these guys are appealing to the adolescent demographic, if I were to guess. And I'm sure that I understand that there's quite a few adults that watch these guys as well. I mean, there would have to be with that many viewers, I'm assuming. But these kids who've not understood what it means to actually work for money, either like taking mommy or daddy's credit card and sending money or whatever, to me just kind of flies in the face. It's like, are you even thinking about that? Just, apparently not. I guess not. It's kind of like that Creflo Dollar. What was it, about a month ago? Asking his congregation to send him $65 million so that he could buy a brand new Learjet. Yeah, you really do need a new Learjet. And I'll write a check for you right now. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, it's just, it amazes me that, I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. And, it may be legal, completely legal to do, but it is, to me, highly distasteful and lacks character. It lacks tact. Dare I say, use the word moral on here. But anyway, that's my take on it, and that's really all I got to say about that. So in any or either case, there will be more motorcycle stuff forthcoming. There's tons of footage that I've not gotten around to and edited, only because, as I've mentioned, I've just got so many other things going on. And not that, you know, if anybody really cares, but it's just all of these projects that I've wanted to do. And you know, this whole thing with the subscriptions, like subscribe to me, subscribe to me, subscribe to me, blah, 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 blah. If you like what I do, subscribe. If you don't, then don't. I mean, you know, the idea that somebody has to beg people to like them or subscribe to their channel, I get it. It's a marketing thing, whatever, that's fine. But and I do it, and I've done it, but I've kind of gotten to the point where, you know what, you don't have to like. I'm not asking anybody to like what I do, and I, quite frankly, I don't give a rip if people like or don't like what I do. Most of the content that I've made because it's content that interests me. And I do know that there are people out there like me that like to look at the same things that I do, are concerned with the same details that I'm concerned with, stuff. So I try to put elements of that into it, to appeal to those people. If you're into just being a clown out on the road and that kind of stuff, that's really not me. And it's not that I don't appreciate humor. I certainly do. That's just not entirely my brand of humor, all of the time. And anyway, so there it is. There you have it. I think this has consumed enough of your time. The other one more thing I think I forgot to mention was I have a project bike that I'm working on, and I am going to probably be I'm trying to put together elements of a documentary in order to do that bike, because that's something that is like a pet project of mine. I want to do it right. I want to get it right, and that sort of thing. So I want to make that as interesting to the viewing audience as I possibly can, without being too cliche, but we'll be working on that as well. I have an old Kawasaki. It's a 1975, 74, 75 Kawasaki S1 250 triple. Really cool bike. And I've not entirely decided which direction I'm going to go in terms of like restoration and build sort of thing. But I guess you could say I kind of have my fingers crossed, because there are a few people that may be instrumental in helping me with the build. And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. So it's going to be as much of a process of patience for me as it is the viewing audience, or people who are interested in seeing that progress. So, and I want to try to include as much detail about that project as I possibly can. So anyway, if you've tuned in and you've enjoyed this small discussion, this little vignette of some sort of random topics that I've put out there, you're certainly welcome to like the video and to subscribe to my channel, but you are not obligated to. Thanks. Have a good night. Hope everybody, all of those of you who are mothers, had a great Mother's Day, and we will talk to you soon.